This year's Santa reunion marks our 30th birthday party for the Real Bearded Santa world, a professional community which has quite literally improved the quality of Christmas for everyone who celebrates this holiday anywhere in the world. The past 3 decades have witnessed the formation of hundreds of professional Santa groups, along with countless schools and academies, conferences and conventions, and an ever-growing support industry, from custom costumers to built-in bootmakers to prop shops to reindeer ranchers. And they all have one thing in common. They can all trace their roots back to the third Sunday of January 1995 and to the rustic charm of Clearman's Northwoods Inn in La Mirada, California. Inside that day, sitting around a table directly beneath these perpetually snow-covered eaves, were 10 professional actors who had met the preceding September when they'd all been cast as Santa Claus in the same TV commercial. German mail-order giant Otto Versant had just landed the world's biggest supermodel, Cindy Crawford, to appear on the cover of their fall-winter catalog, and they decided to celebrate by shooting the world's biggest Christmas commercial. Casting calls had gone out to agents throughout the Southwest, stipulating that any candidate submitted must have own costume and real beard. 10 men were selected, and on a sunny September afternoon, Universal Studios' famous Brownstone Street set was transformed into a winter wonderland. The theme of the commercial was, "Our catalog has so many gift ideas that Santa's going to need help delivering them all." To the dulcet tones of Eartha Kitt's Santa Baby, 9 of the Santas scrambled in and out of doorways along the sidewalk, bumping into each other in their haste to distribute huge armfuls of wrapped gifts, while the lead actor, Santa Tom Hartsfield, sat contentedly in his sleigh, thumbing through the catalog. During the shoot, which lasted nearly 13 hours, these guys did what most professional actors do. They swapped war stories about their most and least favorite gigs. At one point, Santa Ed Murphy suggested that they come up with a name for their little group, and when Hartsfield, recalling that casting call they'd all responded to, whimsically suggested the Amalgamated Order of Real Bearded Santas, that name stuck instantly. As the commercial shoot finally began to wind down, one of them suggested that they should all get together sometime and do lunch, after their upcoming holiday seasons ended, of course. None of them realized, as they sat around that rough-hewn table laughing, that their little clatch would be remembered forevermore as the first annual Real Bearded Santa reunion. They had so much fun that, to a man, they all agreed that they should meet again at the same place on the same Sunday of the following year. And by the 3rd year, many of those in attendance had invited a Santa friend or two, and so the Santa luncheon began to grow quite rapidly. Santa Tom Hartsfield, the lead actor in the Otto commercial, soon became the de facto leader of this informal gathering as well. It was Hartsfield who collected contact information from each new guest and personally made sure that he was invited to the next luncheon. It was Hartsfield who took most of the pictures at these gatherings, who paid for lots of copies to share with the others, and who spent his own time and money to mail them out. By the start of the new millennium, Hartsfield was beginning to feel a bit overwhelmed, and he knew just who to ask for help managing the group. One of the new visitors that year also happened to be one of the most famous Santas in the world, Santa Tim Conahan. So the surprise wasn't that Hartsfield asked Conahan to help, but that Santa Tim was able to find the time to do so. Thanks to his personal and professional connections, Aorb's media profile began to increase rapidly, and his experience as a promoter and organizer proved to be exactly what we needed at this point in our evolution. The transition was announced at the next reunion, where Santa Tim was also prepared to announce the first ever expansion event in the Real Bearded Santa world, a summer picnic for the Santas of Southern California, which in 2001 was still about 85% of luncheon attendees. The luncheon continued to grow under Santa Tim's husbandry, and by now their annual group photo was beginning to distract drivers tooling along the Interstate 5 just a few dozen yards away. In 2002, Cunahan introduced another Real Bearded Santa tradition, which continues to this day, the Luncheon Yearbook. And in his prototypical leadership style, he dedicated this innovation to the Santa who basically built this airplane while teaching himself to fly it, Santa Tom Hartsfield. If you'll forgive the mixed metaphor, by the 2003 luncheon, it was becoming clear that we were going to need a bigger boat. This time, the traffic snarl calls the CHP officer to pull up on the side of I-5 with lights flashing to discourage drivers trying to slow down and snap a quick pic. Santa Tim included a blank Aorbs membership certificate in that year's photo book, so anybody who wanted could simply add their name and frame it. In 2004, the dam burst, and the Santas came spilling out of Northwoods Inn, seeking other Southern California accommodations for their ever-growing numbers. That year, we forced the crew over at Acapulco Restaurant in Long Beach to seriously reevaluate their careers in the hospitality industry, as Santas were practically hanging from the rafters to be with one another inside. The following year, this movable feast headed over to Stevens Steakhouse in Commerce, where, for the first time, Santa Tim had reserved their largest banquet room just for us. Just across the street, there was a small park where we could arrange this rogues gallery for our traditional Santa group photo. And the banquet room was even spacious enough for allowing some other first in this luncheon. For example, Spark Hill Productions sent a film crew over to work on a documentary about the Real Bearded Santas phenomenon. And Mrs. Clauses began to appear in the photo book for the first time. And Adele's of Hollywood sent a rack of theatrical Santa suits over for folks like me to borrow for their yearbook photo. This inspired planners to invite others whose products or services would be of interest to their fellow jolly gents, and so the vendor fair was born. As we all gathered once again at Stevens Steakhouse the following January, relatively few of us could even suspect that our decade of organic growth was about to get a huge dose of Miracle Grow. Santa Tim's hand-picked cadre of visionary planners had been hard at work organizing an event which would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Discover Santa 2006. Buses full of Santas, Mrs. Clauses, elves, and other camp followers descended upon the hapless city of Branson, Missouri that summer, resulting in the largest group of real bearded Santas in history. And even if we'd wanted to, we couldn't hide that party from the national media. First to ride our updraft was CNN, who were delighted to share our celebrations with the world. And we grabbed column space from a number of media outlets, coast to coast. But the fireworks really began with this lead in USA Today, which was at the top of its game in 2005, with a daily circulation of well over 50 million readers. The explosive growth which followed was as inspiring as it was intimidating. The 2007 luncheon was already scheduled for the Queen Mary in Long Beach, and planners watched with delight and eventually growing alarm as registrations began to flood in for the event. I was master of ceremonies that year, as well as running all of our AV equipment, so I wasn't directly involved in registrations. But everyone on the committee knew that we were rapidly running out of room in the Windsor Salon on the Queen Mary, and I believe this was the first year we had to turn away a number of would-be guests. In 2008, we discovered Knott's Berry Farm Resort. Or perhaps I should say Knott's Berry Farm discovered us. Over the next 15 years, they would host the majority of our reunions, and they would in turn call upon us year after year to help them launch a new ride or a new restaurant. Their grand ballroom was so spacious that vendors could set up along the walls and still leave enough room between tables for the birth of another Santa reunion first, the Santa Fashion Show. 2008 was also the year a number of guests decided they didn't want the fun to end after the luncheon, so they all booked a 3-day trip down to the Mexican Riviera. By posting all the fun they were having to social media, this group launched perhaps the greatest addition ever to our annual reunion, the Santa Cruise. Year after year, the cruisers would be joined by ever larger crowds, until the cruise would finally be merged with the luncheon itself and become the Santa Reunion Cruise. But more on that later, because we now come to the most historical development of 2008. For years, Aorbs had been toying with the idea of becoming a 501c, but that project had gotten sidetracked following Santa Tim's decision to step down in 2007 in order to pursue his own projects. Thanks to a particular pair of bad Santas who had joined the all-volunteer board of directors following Branson, the leadership had descended into petty squabbling and side-choosing, which resulted in the most embarrassing period in our 30-year history, which of course was inevitably discovered by the media and dubbed the Santa Wars. And so, several of the Southern California Santa groups decided to take the bull by the horns. After all, it was our Santa reunion which remained the thread running throughout the history of the RBS world. Ignoring the Santa Wars entirely, we changed our name to the Fraternal Order of Real Bearded Santas and applied for a corporate charter from the California Secretary of State to be a nonprofit, mutual benefit, voting member corporation. Once we received that, the IRS formally issued an Employer Identification Number, or EIN, making us a national organization. And finally, they approved us to become a 501c7, which is their designation for a professional fraternity. And with those certifications, Forbes was officially recognized as an adult in the business world, meaning that we can now legally conduct business with other companies. And that was when we really got busy. By the end of 2008, Forbes Santas were getting their background checks for half price from IntelliCorp, who served the U.S. Department of State and the Defense Department. Thanks to our hero, insurance broker Steve Waters, our members could purchase professional liability insurance with coverage of $2 million or $4 million, and for the first time in the history of entertainment, included protection against false allegations of abuse or molestation. Forbes Santa Insurance quickly became the industry standard and remains our proudest accomplishment so far. In 2009, we happily returned to Knott's Berry Farm, and it was time for another first. Because so many of our guests traveled to join us, we decided to welcome them on Friday night with a visit to Hometown Buffet, which future reunion planners would come to call our meet and greet. After the luncheon, an even larger group of attendees boarded the Carnival Miracle for our second Forbes Santa Cruise. By the fall of 2009, America was in the grips of the H1N1 pandemic, and for the first time since the darkest hours of World War II, sober and sane people were wondering aloud whether this might be the year without Christmas. The board of directors came up with a game plan which we thought might save the holiday season, but we would need some help. I wrote to an alphabet soup of government agencies requesting early access to the vaccine for our nation's frontline seasonal workers, once the first responders and other critical personnel were protected, of course. Armed only with these letters and a few encouraging early responses from the CDC and National Institutes of Health, I went to Kaiser and received my vaccination a full 30 days ahead of public availability. I posted my success to various Santa social networks, and others began following my lead. Cumulatively, we were able to provide vaccinated Santas to hundreds of corporate and municipal events all across the country, prompting the Boston Globe and others to credit Forbes with saving Christmas that year. Knott's welcomed us back in 2010, and the Santa reunion kept up its brisk pace of firsts. Our first formal President's Breakfast took place on Saturday morning, and that evening, our first Saturday showcase found us completely filling the red section of Medieval Times. We were such a hit that our Red Knight joined us for the luncheon the next day. For the third year in a row, Forbes clauses took to the high seas after the reunion, and this year there were so many Santa Cruzers on board that senior ship staff began hanging out with us. That fall, one of Senator Tim Conahan's projects came through in a huge way. He struck a deal with producers of CBS's smash hit The Mentalist to create an entire episode based upon a real bearded Santa reunion. The Jolly Red Elf was episode 10 of season 3 and was reported to the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest paid gathering of Santa Clauses. In 2011, we returned to Knott's Resort and to medieval times. This time they dispatched both the king and the Red Knight to our event, so this was another first. The first time a king and a knight in armor appeared in our yearbook. Oh yeah, there was one other first this reunion. It was the first time Forbes recognized our 50 new life members, around 30 of whom were in attendance that weekend, and around 20 of whom survive today, by the way. In 2012, the San Diego Santas hosted the Santa World at Marriott Mission Valley, and they had another first up their sleeves. Guests were invited to an afternoon on board the USS Midway Museum, followed by 2 full days of workshops and seminars leading up to the big gala on Sunday, so the first 4-day reunion. 2013 found us back at Knott's Resort with our biggest crowd yet. And after we returned from another triumphant tournament at medieval times, about 50 of us walked next door to Flash Mob Pink's Hot Dogs, which we considered ours because we were their grand opening media event. In 2014, we continued to grow, and Knott's Berry Farm gave us plenty of reasons to stay. In a bidding war with another resort, Knott's sweetened the pot with an all-day pass to America's original theme park, and offering to hold our meet and greet at the world-famous Mrs. Knott's restaurant. By the way, her cooking was so good, folks would wait for hours to get in. And Papa Knott was trying to alleviate their boredom when he started to add little distractions on the grounds. That's how Knott's Berry Farm got started over 100 years ago. After Saturday's workshops and the Senior Santa Seminar, our formal dinner on Saturday night was followed by a showcase of Santas with incredible talents. Who knew so many Santas were also performers? Our first for the 2014 reunion was actually an acknowledgement of firsts. The Forbes Founders Award is specifically intended to recognize individuals who have founded some integral element of the professional Santa world. The inaugural awards were simultaneously shared by Santas Tom Hartsfield and Tim Conahan for literally founding the modern professional Santa world. There have been 7 Founders Awards so far. In 2015, we returned yet again to Knott's Berry Farm, who have been so good to us over the years. Although reunion planners were definitely playing the reunion's greatest hits, like the Party in the Park, the Meet and Greet at Mama Knott's, Santa Talent Show, yada, yada, yada. Despite such daunting precedent competition, however, we managed to score at least one first. Our keynote speaker that year was Eric Kaplan, executive producer of television's all-time highest-ranking sitcom, CBS's Big Bang Theory. While that alone would have made him our most popular keynote speaker of all time, the true reason we invited Eric, and undoubtedly the reason he accepted, was his new book, Does Santa Exist? I won't spoil it for you, but if you like your philosophy with a dollop of belly laugh, I will loan you my copy. 2016 found us back in Mission Valley, San Diego, this time at the Sheraton. As usual, a great time was had by all. My personal highlight was the excursion to the legendary Hotel del Coronado, known as America's Palace since 1888. That summer marked the 10th anniversary of Discover Santa in Branson, Missouri, and considering the growth which we have inspired throughout our industry, it will probably come as no surprise to learn that it was even more successful than its predecessor and namesake. Forbes was well represented in the festivities, the parade, and the vendor fair. And this time it was picked up as a feature article by CBS's Sunday Morning, which certainly didn't hurt the Santa World's media profile. In 2017, we decided to merge our 2 best ideas and have our reunion on board a cruise. Over a 5-day period, we fit all of our reunion activities, except the vendor fair, into the itinerary of the Carnival Miracle, and also got to explore both Catalina and Ensenada. 2018 at the Cerritos Sheraton was amazing. From the luxury bus ride to enjoy a day down at the Long Beach Aquarium, to the show by Mesmerist Joe Mystic, to the Route 66 themed sock hop. We partied all weekend long. In 2019, we took over the Airport Hotel and Conference Center in Ontario, California. As reunion co-chair that year, I can tell you that we were swinging for the fences. And honestly, the results were a mixed bag. On the one hand, we were able to organize not one, but 2 Friday excursions for our guests to choose from, each of which would take them to 2 destinations. We not only synchronized all the moving parts with transportation and tickets and the like, we also saved enough on the buses alone to spring for lunch at the winery for everyone on both tours. That's on the one hand. On the other, our after-dinner murder mystery turned out to be a bit of a fizzle, despite everyone's heroic efforts at costume and characters. And of course, that's entirely on me. 2020 started great. The San Diego Santas booked us into the world-famous Dana on Mission Bay, and they hit the ground running. Our Friday excursion, a SEAL tour, which picked us up at the hotel and drove us out onto the bay, I dubbed Driving with Dolphins. And their Saturday lineup included live performances by the biggest Claus act in America, the Brothers Claus. Everyone left San Diego with a warm glow in their hearts for about a month. By March, Forbes was advising against in-person meetings pending further developments involving COVID-19. Unfortunately, those further developments went from bad to worst. The Forbes newsletter, Just Be Claus, underwent a radical evolution in just a couple of months, and we convened the greatest luminaries in the Santa world to address the ever-growing crisis threatening not only Christmas, as H1N1 had in 2009, but was rapidly becoming an existential crisis for our species. Dusting off our H1N1 playbook from 2009, I relaunched our campaign to save Christmas, and within a few weeks, I was invited to address an emergency meeting of the CDC's Advisory Council for Immunological Procedures, ACIP. And I told them that our plan had worked back then, and it would work again. The Secretary of HHS himself called to discuss Forbes' Operation Santa Claus, and asked for our help with the administration's Operation Warp Speed, in exchange for the early vaccine access we were requesting. Alas, the promised vaccines failed to materialize, so Forbes simply pivoted away from Christmas as usual and began recommending alternative techniques to get that family Christmas photo. From simple plexiglass between Santa and the guests, to separate chroma key sets, to my personal favorite, the Santa Snow Globe, which was purportedly the result of an elf magician's accident. As things continued to worsen globally for the first time, we recommended that all Clauses limit their appearances to virtual only that year. When 2021 rolled around, we were all under lockdown, which led to the grimmest first of our long history. The world's first virtual Santa reunion. If there was a silver lining, it was the fact that nearly all of America's premier Santa trainers had nothing better to do that Sunday. So we had not just 1 or 2, but 3 keynote speakers that year. Although things showed slight improvement by summer's end, our ranks were being hit harder than the general population because most of us were, by definition, in the most at-risk category, either due to advanced age or weight or underlying medical conditions. Bracing the Santa world for another bad season, we reached out to Abbott Laboratories, the world's leading producers of home COVID testing. We knew that we were asking them to reach into their rapidly dwindling supplies of kits, for which the whole world was clamoring, just so they could donate thousands of those precious boxes to our members. I don't know how I talked them into it, but they gave us enough for every Claus to test themselves every week through Christmas. And they even paid for the shipping. Oh yeah, and Operation Santa Claus also provided free masks and other PPE to Clauses throughout the summer and fall. Again, for free. It was a close thing whether the world would reopen in time for our 2022 reunion, but we had left all the deposits in place with Knott's since 2020, and we continued to plan as best we could for contingencies. Here, we caught a break, in the form of another reunion first. National photography behemoth Cherry Hill Programs approached us with an offer to become the reunion's first corporate sponsor. This would be in addition to the grand raffle prize of a custom Santa suit, which Adele's of Hollywood has generously donated year after year. At our formal dinner, planners accomplished another first, with the performance by Chris Strait, a professional comedian whose specials have included Comedy Central, Netflix, and HBO. Finally, while America seemed to be past the worst of the pandemic, we once again relied heavily on that most at-risk thing to persuade Abbott Labs to provide COVID test kits to the Claus community once again. We will never know just how many lives were saved by this partnership alone. Not just our Clauses, of course, but also the millions of family members with whom they would come in close contact during the holidays. You're welcome, America. Which brings us, at long last, to last year. And now that it's safely in our rearview mirror, I don't mind telling you that reunion planners really went through the ringer on this one. Not even during the pandemic did our beloved reunion come so close to failure. After months of planning, we contracted with Carnival and had been taking registrations for about 5 weeks, when we were abruptly notified that Carnival had decided to rent our entire ship to someone else that week, canceling all reservations. Char Martin of RCE Travel was barely able to book all of us onto the same ship for the following week. And rather than the 2 ports we had planned to visit, we'd be staying in Cabo for 2 days. The board of directors stepped up at this point to help the reunion. We were able to hire luxury buses to take all of our guests on an excursion to Mission San Jose del Cabo, along with professional guides to lead tours there, and at the glass factory on our way back to the ship. Last year, our San Diego chapter stepped up in a big way, taking us back to the beach and back to the beautiful Dana on the bay. Our excursion was a luxury bus ride away at the legendary Fleet Science Center in historic Balboa Park. And all 3 days we enjoyed the wit and wisdom of Santa Steve Gillum of Brothers Claus fame. All of this was planned and executed by the finest event chairs in all of America's south left corner, San Diego's Fab Four, half of whom are on this year's executive committee as well. They really put the unity in Christmas community. Which brings us, at long last, to here, the Doubletree Golf Resort in breathtaking Palm Springs. We hope you're having the time of your life, and I'll close now so we can all get back to it, by simply inviting you to join us next January as our founding chapter, the Santas of the OC, takes the reins and brings the reunion back to America's resort, Orange County, California. Watch this space.